I'm Dedra Jize, the Geriatric Care Manager with Litherland, Kennedy and Associates, a California estate planning and elder care law firm. Today I'm here with Tami Anastasia. She is a dementia consultant and educator and author of her new book, The Essential Strategies for the Dementia Caregiver. Thank you, Tami, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Dedra.
So today we're talking about essentially, it's not uncommon for clients of ours when they get a new diagnosis of dementia, maybe just mild cognitive impairment, they come in, or sometimes they'll actually, oh, we're already mid-stage and we got the diagnosis. But, what do you find the most, people are shocked.
Yes.
And, for us, they're like, oh, we better get your estate planning documents in order while you still have capacity. And that's a great thing to do.
Yes.
Get your duckies in a row.
Yes.
But from the more family caregiver, what do you see?
Yeah. So I have sort of a rule of thumb. The more educated you can become about this disease, the better prepared you're going to be for how this disease is going to progress. So, it's tough on the family. First of all, everybody's in shock, right? And by the time you go to get a diagnosis, you've been noticing behaviors for a long time. The average person actually shows symptoms or signs of dementia or cognitive impairment at least 1 to 3 years before they even get diagnosed. So, and then you've got to be aware of how this dementia is going to affect your loved one, how it's going to change your loved one, and how those changes are going to affect you. So you have 2 educational components. One is, how's this disease going to affect your loved one? And secondly, you want to educate yourself so you know how to interact with your loved one as they change cognitively, behaviorally, physically. And so the best thing we can do is really support them in getting educated about the disease. But it's difficult because we don't want to believe, there's a lot of stigma still associated with dementia. And I think, again, the best thing we can do is when we have a formal diagnosis, educate. And you focus on what you can do to empower yourself about educating yourself, what your loved one does or doesn't do from an education standpoint. At least take control of what you do have control of.
And, I know when you said, like, you see this, often you see you see signs of it 1-3 years. I've even heard before that.
Yeah.
Sometimes people have the early onset.
Yeah.
So now you have a loved one who might be full-blown Alzheimer's at, 53, which, and yet it's like you might have seen things back when they were 30, 40. And, that's a tough one for families to swallow.
Yeah. So I get a lot of questions about what's the difference between normal aging and dementia. And I always try to keep it in layman terms. The easiest way to think about it is, it's one thing for us to get forgetful. We walk into a room. What did I go in the room for? But I have the ability to recall later.
Are you talking about me?
Right? I have the ability to recall or remember, or I have the ability to retrace my steps. When someone's showing signs of cognitive impairment, they can't retrace, they can't remember. And so it's that distinction. And the other thing is that the changes that occur also affect our daily living activities. They affect the choices we make. They affect how we take care of ourselves. As a matter of fact, 2 of the things that, we see the most are, we look in people's refrigerator, and if your loved one lives alone and there's spoiled food in there, or there is no food in there, that's sort of a red flag, right? The other one is if we see them lots of bills stacking up, or they can't pay their bills, or their hygiene, especially people who've always been very on top of their hygiene. And we see that hygiene shift. They're not bathing as often. Their clothes are starting to smell a little bit. But what I want to say is you'll notice behavior changes and they won't go away if it's dementia, if it's cognitive impairment. you're going to see the behavior is progressively going to increase over time. It's going to reoccur a little more often. So those are usually red flags right there to try to make this distinction between normal aging and what might be considered mild cognitive impairment / or dementia. 50% of people who get diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment may not get dementia.
Right. Good point.
So people with mild cognitive impairment can still function fairly well compared to people who get dementia, and then the cognitive impairment impairs every functionality.
I once had a client come in and what she was worried about, she had a diagnosis for her husband. And what she came in was that she was a caregiver of her husband, and she was scared to death of going broke caring for him.
Yeah.
So what she came in to talk to me about was Medi-Cal and how to become eligible and what does that look like, and that whole background. And it was great because I'm thinking, okay, she's looking forward.
Yes.
And she was one of these who would literally was putting money under her mattress because
Yes.
she's just afraid of losing it all. But when talking to her, I thought, well, let's talk about your husband a little bit. I need to know more about him. And
Yes.
this is a scenario that I give in my life care planning webinar that we do here, because it was a catastrophe that could have been, what could have been done different is the way my webinar goes.
Yes.
But let me just throw it to you.
Sure.
So she's all concerned about finances, money, understandably. But when I asked, well, let's talk a little bit about your husband, I wanted to know more about him. Is he dressing himself? Does he need reminders? Are you actually putting hands-on assistance? What are you doing? I asked, does he go out the front door? And, I'm thinking, does he take a walk? And I'm concerned with wandering,
Yes.
lost. And she like kind of looks at me weird. She goes, well, yeah, he goes out front. I'm like, well, how far does he go? She goes, well, he drives to the supermarket. He drives to the coffee shop. And I'm looking at him like, the man you were just talking about that need help with all these things is driving.
Yeah.
Well, I can't do anything about it. And we certainly discussed options, but she just kept bringing it back to the money. I said, you know what? Fine.
Yeah.
How would you have addressed that person?
Yeah, so driving is one of the most sensitive, one of the most difficult, one of the most challenging behaviors to deal with. I do have a little section on that in my book that talks about how to deal with the driving. So here again, I would do exactly what you did. I'd ask a lot more questions, but I think what also needs to be brought to people's attention when it comes to driving is that if your loved one has a diagnosis of dementia, and they say early onset, they might still be able to drive, right? But as this disease progresses, right, our reflexes get slow, and it takes 2 seconds, 2 seconds for any of us to get into an accident or something to happen. But here's the horror of the situation that actually happened to one of my families that I work with privately. And the husband got into an accident. It was not his fault. It was the other person's fault. They found out he had a diagnosis of dementia, and the attorneys for the person who caused the accident went after my client's loved one because he had dementia. And not only did they sue him, they sued the family, the whole family, for being aware that someone with cognitive impairment / dementia was driving. So it is a huge, huge liability issue. And so I think here again, we have to spend more time educating the family caregiver, the liability issues, but not only the liability issues, but also probably deal with, what does this look like if your loved one can't drive anymore?
Right.
What position does that put the caregiver in, right?
Well, people, there's so many fun little tricks you can do about that one.
Yep.
I remember I used to work at a Alzheimer's day program.
Yep.
And there was this one gentleman there, And he always said, yeah, I was on the freeway and the car stopped and they had to take it to the mechanic and still haven't gotten it back.
Yeah.
And I've never, back then I didn't have, I really want to know the full story to that one.
Yeah.
Now, the story I just gave regarding the wife who was concerned with the money.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, just a week after talking with me, her husband got lost.
Yeah. There we
And
go.
she called the police. It was an overnight, I think it was a 2-night thing. They did find him because he was 2 blocks over in a horrible condition, but we don't really know what happened, but he was banging on someone's door, let me into my house.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was the beginning of his downward spiral. I mean, he went from being, physically fine to physically not fine, as well as cognitively just hit him hard.
And that's what happens, right? And that is the problem. They can be okay, but in a split second or, on a dime, this can change abruptly and drastically. Right. And so we don't tend to like the family caregiver to be the bad guy. So what I'm going to recommend is that write down your observations pertaining to your loved one's behavior. And when we like to present it to the doctor and have the doctor try to be the authority to determine about this driving situation and have them call DMV. Or you can report it anonymously to the DMV. As a matter of fact, I'm working with a son right now who's going to do that with his father because his father is driving and we're all very concerned about it. So there are a lot of things you can do. Like you said, we can dismantle the car or disable the car, or we will often say that the car's not working and we'll have it towed to a repair shop. But there are tricks, there are ways, but first we've got to get the family caregiver, the primary caregiver who's taking care of the loved one with dementia on board, because that's where it starts, is that we don't want a horrible accident to happen. We don't want them to be lost. And then God knows what happens when they get lost and the anxiety and the fear that occurs. And we know that with wandering, statistically, it's not good if they get lost. So again, my position is, because I work with the primary caregiver so much, would be to help process what does that look like if your loved one can't drive? How are we going to strategically deal with it? But also I have to get them in touch with the reality of being able to accept that we have some impairment that we need to address.
Yes, excellent. And the reason I bring this up is because it is an important one that doesn't just affect you and your loved one. It could potentially affect the community at large, as well as, if anything happened in your suit. I mean, it'd just be horrible. But there are a lot of tips in your book. And driving is one of them, how to deal with it. So thank you very much, Tami. How can someone get a hold of this book if they were interested in purchasing one, besides coming by the office here? I have some you can have for sale if you like.
Yeah, thanks, Dedra. So they can purchase it on Amazon, or you could go to my website and purchase it through my website, TamiAnastasia.com, TamiAnastasia.com.
All right,
Thank you, Dedra.
Thank you, Tami, very much.